Hi, I'm Ankur Desai. Welcome to the Global News Podcast on YouTube. Today, as the Israel-US war against Iran expands across the region in the Middle East, we're looking at Washington and Iran's military capabilities, the weapons they're using, and crucially, the arms stockpiles and how long they could last for. I'm joined today by our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale. I guess first things first, Jonathan, fears from many people that this could turn into a long-term war. Could that be a possibility?
I mean, it could be a possibility. And we've seen with what's happened in Gaza, with Israel bombing it, saying it was going to destroy Hamas. Well, it hasn't completely destroyed Hamas. We saw with the US targeting the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who are backed by Iran, that they targeted the US, the Houthi rebels, and still didn't destroy all their capability to fire missiles and drones. So even long campaigns don't always achieve their military objectives. We're not really clear about what the military objectives. The US has given, at the start it was a suggestion that it might be about regime change. Now it seems to be very focused on destroying Iran's military capabilities. But these things can go on for a while. And remember, Iran is a country 3 times the size of France. It's a massive country. You can hide weapons, even if you have lots of jets flying over there. And let's be honest, the Israelis and the US pretty much have air supremacy. They're not having to worry too much about, I'm sure the Iranians do have some air defenses, but most of them have gone. Most of the sophisticated stuff has gone. So the initial stages of this war, America would have used some of the most expensive weapons they've got because they're long-range weapons, like, for example, Tomahawk cruise missiles. These weapon systems cost, millions of dollars each, but they're now able to fly over targets without the worry of being shot down or less of a worry of being shot down by the Iranian air defense systems because they've largely been destroyed. And they are able to use much cheaper munitions. So, for example, JDAM bombs, which are essentially dumb bombs fitted with a guidance system, but instead of costing millions of dollars, they cost tens of thousands of dollars.
What sort of arsenal do they possess in Iran? And how can we possibly verify what they have?
Militaries do not give numbers of weapons, stockpiles, and that's pretty much across the board because it gives a potential adversary, information that's going to be very useful to them. How long can they last, essentially? And we're all asking that question. But there are some estimates of what Iran does have. More than 2,000 ballistic missiles before this stage of the conflict started. Remember, last year, the US in Operation Midnight Hammer went after Iran's nuclear capability, but also targeted its long-range weapons production as well. And then we've seen the drones in Ukraine being used, those Shahed drones, which essentially is an Iranian technology, which Iran then handed over to Russia and Russia used to great effect. Well, Iran has mass-produced these drones itself and also given it to its proxies like Hezbollah, like the Houthis in Yemen. And there are believed to be tens of thousands of those. But as I said, the problem at the moment for Iran is that its factories, its weapons production, and we've seen from imagery released by Pentagon, missile launching sites being targeted pretty much every day now.
And Jonathan, are they only going to rely on missiles and drones? Or are there any other strategies in terms of attack?
One of the concerns at the moment, and we're seeing evidence of it, is the way Iran can essentially not just disrupt, can strangle international shipping. Remember, a lot of the oil that comes from the Middle East goes through the Strait of Hormuz, a very narrow passageway with Iran on one side, and then countries like Oman, Bahrain close by, and the UAE. They could still, cause a lot of havoc for a long time. We know that the US has targeted Iran's big warships, but they have still lots of small, fast attack craft, some of them autonomous, which they can use to target shipping. They can mine the Strait of Hormuz. They can make it very, very difficult indeed. And we are talking about conventional war at the moment. But there's also hybrid war. There's there is the potential to attack countries on their own soil whether it be incidents which would be described as terrorist, attacks or
Cyber activities.
cyber activity. And sometimes the reaction or the response will be years away from the event. So, the threat doesn't suddenly disappear. If there was a different government, maybe that would change things. But at the moment, I don't think there's any indication that, the regime's lost a lot of key people, but it doesn't look like it's about to fold yet.
President Trump says we can go as long as we need to, but he is putting pressure on those partners who are producing weapons for the US. He is telling them that you need to start producing them and produce them quickly.
No country has an infinite number of weapons. So I think there's a little bit of exaggeration when President Trump says unlimited. I think they've probably got enough. They will have stockpiles. So all militaries will have stockpiles, and the US will have stockpiles for specific theatres. So, for example, concerns about China, they'd have built stockpiles up in the Indo-Pacific region. There will be stockpiles for the European region, and there'll be stockpiles for the Middle East region. And remember, the US also supplies Israel with a lot of its weapons that it's been using. But I think you can say that at the moment, we're in the early stages of the war, but you look at some of the figures. So the US has carried out more than 2,000 strikes, according to CENTCOM. Each of those strikes would involve multiple missions. Israel is believed to have fired 5,000 bombs and missiles. That's as many as they used in the entire 12-day war against Iran last year. Yeah. So what we do know is that they are probably expending munitions faster than they can produce them. So if you ask the question then, who's going to run out first? I think you got to remember that the US is a superpower. It's got the world's biggest military. Okay, its weapons production is often limited because they're producing very expensive missiles and bombs, and they're at a peacetime level. They're not like Russia. They haven't got a wartime economy. So I think President Trump is going to meet defense companies later this week, and no doubt will ask them to ramp up production. But it would be very difficult for the US to run out of weapons.
When it comes to Iran, I guess in terms of their tactics, could they try to play a game of possum? We know that in recent days the attacks have been less frequent, using less missiles. Could they be playing a waiting game because they're trying to replenish their stocks? So that is something that the US and Israel are very wary of.
Yeah, so I think the figures that we were given by CENTCOM yesterday was that there had been more than an 80% drop in the number of missiles fired by Iran since the first day, and more than a 70% drop of drones fired since the first day. So that would suggest there's been a pretty dramatic decrease. That said, today we hear that, I think it was the UAE where they said that the six missiles launched, more than 100 drones. So clearly Iran still has the capability to do this. It is possible that Iran, we'll see that figure fluctuate because Iran may withhold and protect some of its stocks so that they can prolong this war and make sure that they can retaliate in the future. I think, the real worry is that, as I mentioned, the Houthis in Yemen, and it's worth mentioning Hezbollah, which has been targeted by Israel, still firing missiles into Israel and drones. It has that capability. Another proxy of Iran. Hamas, not completely destroyed, another proxy of Iran. That you can do a lot with degrading their military capabilities, but that doesn't mean they're defeated or they're destroyed. And inevitably something will always survive. And as I said at the beginning, Iran is a country that's 3 times the size of France. So Gaza's a fraction of that size. And that's still not resolved in many ways. So, I think it will be up to the US to decide. They will tell us what they think a victory is, and then we can all argue whether it is a victory. But I think we've already seen the military goals shift a bit. And I think that there will be a point where President Trump will want to end this.
Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. As always, Jonathan Beale, our defence correspondent. If you're interested in stories like this from around the world, do check out our Global News podcast. You can find that from wherever you download your podcast from. And do subscribe and like this video. And do drop us a comment below if there are any stories you'd like us to cover in the future. For now, thanks ever so much for your time.